Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Critical Perspectives. I'm Fiorella Isabel, and I'm here with Vanessa Beely, my wonderful co host and journalist and sane mind in this insane world. And we were talking as the UN Security Council votes came out and Russia and China abstained. And you all know very well what happened and what that signifies. And immediately Vanessa and I were just I mean it was insane the amount of people that went on to try to defend this, because what this did was essentially hand over Gaza legally to Donald Trump and Zionist Israel. And we have never placed, I mean, I'll speak for myself here. I have not placed any value in terms of reliance on the UN, nor on international law. All of that has been pretty much entirely, for me, destroyed for several reasons, but especially most recently with the genocide and the lack of any teeth to do anything about it, the lack of action coming from it. And Vanessa and I have been really unveiling a lot of the intricacies that have been going on in China and Russia. Myself internally, talking about the geopolitics of it, the pragmatism of the Putin administration. We talked about Kirill Dmitriev, which I recommend you all following that particular episode, because I don't think a lot of people knew, because when I talked about it with Pasta, he was like mouth open. He was like, wow, this is like crazy. I didn't know all of this. And, it's kind of like we have different audiences, but in a way there's, some congruence there. And I think that's a good one to watch. And I'm saying this because we were leading up to this moment. We have been talking about the way China and Russia have pragmatically behaved in terms of their expansionism, their trade, China's trade with Israel, China's hands that have been very much embedded with not just Israel, but with the United States, as well as Russia's cultural and close relationship with Israel in general, and its role in the Middle East or West Asia and in Syria. So we have been talking about all these different regional aspects of these two major powers and how they're not necessarily following this altruism that many have given them, but they're following a stance that is basically engraved in economic expansion and global trade. And, to a degree, we have been talking about this for months, and it's been clear. We've been pointing out the situations, especially with Jolani in Syria and the normalization that was very quick coming
now
from
in
Russia
China.
and in China as well. So saying all of this, when this vote happened, it basically confirmed everything that we have been talking about, that we have been getting yelled at for, that we have been getting attacked for simply just saying things as they are and not applying our own desires for how we want Russia or China to be and how we want them to act. And what I've been seeing out there is people still look at them, especially people. So there's differences. The people on the left, especially the journalists, and especially the people who are influencers or have some sort of investment in it, their whole entire focus has been to maintain the PR image of these two powers and this idea of a multipolar world as being something far different and far more equitable than what we have now. And because that idea is being, tarnished, not by our doing, but by their own actions, Russia and China,
or inaction,
or inaction in this case, or it's kind of cognitive dissonance takes place. They're trying to find this confirmation bias. They're trying to really hold on to this image. And so I want to start off, Vanessa, by getting your take on what you've seen out there and how you think it's come, we've come at this moment where we've been sort of prepared for this, but it's become so blatant now, and it's indefensible what has happened, and people's just mental gymnastics and 5D chess claims that this is somehow the better, that actually not vetoing was a good decision for China and Russia both. and for Palestine is essentially what they're saying, that this is it would have changed nothing. It would have changed nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to know where to start, because the arguments have been going into so many weird directions, honestly. From actually what I describe as ethno-supremacist, racist arguments, where it's an Arab problem that they're being slaughtered. So it has nothing to do with Russia or China. But of course, what that kind of argument overlooks is, one, that Russia and China signed up to the UN Charter. They signed up to the Geneva Convention. They signed up to the Genocide Convention. Russia and China are constantly making very bold and noble statements that they support international law and that global security is so important for the world today because the West is destroying it. The West is violating international law. It's violating human rights law. The ICJ ruling on a plausible genocide has already criminalized the majority of the actions by the genocidal, occupying, oppressive force of the Zionist entity. So within that frame, both countries should have upheld international law, all of the Humanitarian Geneva Genocide Conventions, and said no. Instead, what they effectively did was say yes. Because as two of the P5 countries, the 5 countries that actually have veto power, they had, in my view, under international law, they had absolutely the responsibility to say no, rather than to effectively say yes, and then afterwards go out publicly and say, yeah, but it's a really bad idea. And effectively, this is just a repeat of a British mandate and so on and so forth. But even in Vasilina Bensia's speech, where he condemned the resolution 2803, and we'll come on to the actual details of that, which is it doesn't deviate from the Trump peace scam. But we should come on to that in a bit more detail. But effectively, what does he do? He doesn't call it a genocide. And we've said this, that Russia has deliberately avoided, since October the 7th, calling what Israel is doing against Palestinians a genocide, while it will use the terminology genocide to describe what's going on in eastern Ukraine, right? He doesn't call it a genocide. He doesn't say that it's entirely wrong to be disarming a resistance that is defending itself and its people against disproportionate force, against rape, abuse, torture, child abduction, child rape, while effectively now handing Gaza over to people like Trump, who is not only the co-perpetrator of the genocide, but is being indicted by the Epstein files. So you're putting people who are involved in pedophilia and child abduction, child abuse, child torture in charge of how many orphan children now in what's left of Gaza. 58% is now under control of the genocidal Israeli forces. And by the way, neither the US nor Israel ever leave territory that they've occupied, just to be very clear. So what is now known as the yellow line, if anyone thinks that Israel is going to withdraw at any point from owning the 58% of Gazan territory that is actually agriculturally the best part of Gaza, leaving only really desert areas, totally unlivable in areas, of course, even more so after the obliteration of homes and infrastructure. But they're also occupying the agricultural areas inside Gaza itself, right? So for me, we talked about this just before we started, and for me, it's almost like you're saying, you're standing at the door of your house and a rapist turns up, and instead of putting your hand up and saying, no, you can't enter my house, you allow them in, watch them commit the crime and complain about it, but you didn't stop them in the first place. And I'm sorry, but this is effectively what Russia and China have done. And not only that, what is the shreds of international law that they claim to have been upholding? And people have also been pushing China's policy of non-interference. Well, I'm sorry, I'm so fed up with this. Go tell the people that are being genocided in Sudan that China doesn't believe in interference when they're supplying weapons to the UAE, and the UAE is giving those advanced weapons to the RSF to carry out the genocides in Darfur. And then it's supplying weapons to the SAF, to the Sudanese armed forces. Why is this exactly? Why is it supplying arms effectively to both sides in a conflict that is facilitating and enabling another genocide in Sudan? Because the UAE is plundering gold from Sudan, and China is then buying it on the open market from the UAE. So please don't talk to me about China's non-interference policy, because this is absolute nonsense. And in the last 3 days, China, through backdoor channels, has actually 3 Chinese state companies have invested in Dalia, one of the main Israeli energy companies. So while people are trying to justify the fact that both Russia and China have not at any time withdrawn economic support for Israel since October the 7th, Russia is one of the primary suppliers of oil, or facilitates oil supply from Kazakhstan. We've talked about this in previous programs. It's, for me, what I'm struggling to understand here is how these people who purport to be anti-imperialist, who claim, whether they're on the left, right, or center, I don't really care, but who claim to support the oppressed peoples of this world, can dismiss the genocide of Palestinians because it's an Arab issue. Let the Arabs sort it out, when they know perfectly well, unless they're so ignorant that they don't know it, that the British and the Americans have engineered it so the majority of the sovereign Arab states are captured as part of the Zionist bloc. That the PA, by the way, for those ignoramuses, sorry, that have been commenting on social media, is they're claiming that Russia and China did what it did because Mahmoud Abbas, who's a doddering irrelevance as far as I'm concerned, both in Palestine and outside Palestine, told them to do so because he's what? The Palestinian legitimate government? No, he isn't. Hamas is the elected government of Gaza. And Hamas actually expressly asked Russia and China to block the resolution. So a sovereign government in Gaza has asked them to block the resolution. And every single civil society, humanitarian organization, political and military organization in Palestine has rejected and condemned the resolution. So if we're talking about upholding sovereignty within international law, and that is what the UN Security Council should represent, non-interference in the sovereignty of countries, then what are they doing? And for me, in a sense, it just makes it absolutely clear. Nobody within the most powerful countries in this world, whether it's BRICS or in the Western imperialist axis, can be relied on to actually defend, as we've said multiple times, the oppressed peoples. Forget it. And I think, if you're going to defend Russia and China's position over and above examining the impacts on the Palestinian people, not only the Palestinian people in Palestine, but the evening that the resolution was passed, Israel bombed, massacred Palestinian refugees in a sports field in southern Lebanon. Israel Katz put out a statement saying, we no longer consider these to be under humanitarian protection. We consider them to be terror cells. So when people say, yeah, but if Russia and China had vetoed this, then the US was threatening they would just carry on with the killing. The killing isn't going to stop.
Yeah.
The killing hasn't stopped for 100 years. The killing hasn't stopped in this region. And that very night, so when you use this argument, it's complete nonsense, because that very night, 15 Palestinians were massacred, children and civilians, not Hamas, so the same excuse that is used in Gaza, and dozens more injured. It's just, other than to go through the arguments that we're being presented with, and we've covered a couple of them already, I don't really know how to push back against this. And I think to some degree, you put your finger on it on one comment that you made, is that we have to remember that some of these commentators are actually being paid by Russia or China. And so therefore, we should not be expecting that they're going to turn against the hand that feeds them. But that means that you're not getting honest analysis. And that's another important point to make, because that makes them no different, in my opinion, to the mainstream media, to the legacy media, because you're incentivized to push messaging across, or you're incentivized to ignore the glaring anomalies in what you're supporting.
You know, when you brought up the Arab argument, this is the thing that I'm getting a lot is, you know, I got that comment from one of the DDG geopolitics hosts about how we need to take it up with the PA. And it's like, how would the PA have anything to do with anything, because they're captured? I mean, this is a Zionist controlled entity, and when you go to, as you said, when you go to occupied Palestinian territories, it is very clear the PA are foot soldiers for the Zionists. It's a cop-out. It is an insult to even say that. It's also an insult to then take it to the Arab nations that are also entirely captured and controlled by the United States and Israel. And so when they don't talk about this, when they make it about just the Arabs failing, it's the same thing that Americans have been saying, U.S. Americans, about the Middle East. Oh, they're always at war. They're always bombing each other.
Exactly.
They're always, it's that supremacist mentality.
Yep.
Yes. And it's that same mentality that these people who say they're anti-imperialists, who say, you know, that they care about Palestinians, are regurgitating. And what has happened here is there's been an unveiling of these people in terms of what they actually stand for. And what they actually stand for is whatever narrative is either one, paying them well, or whatever narrative they've tethered themselves to that they can't get out of, because they've built their whole identities around being cheerleaders. And we talked about this in previous shows about how there are certain content creators out there that are just basically cheerleading, Russia and China, glorifying like war, glorifying weapons, glorifying a lot of these things, but never talk about like the reality of it. And then they boast like, oh, do you like actually real politics? Do you actually, know geopolitics, as if like this is a game? These are people's lives.
Exactly.
And what we're discussing is their reality. And when Donald Trump, I want to read what Donald Trump said, because then you can go into, Vanessa, what this will mean. But Donald Trump immediately, when he was essentially handed Gaza, immediately said, congratulations to the world on the incredible vote of the United Nations Security Council just moments ago. I just want to say, so you are.
But he thanked Russia. He thanked Russia and China expressly, actually.
Yes. So people defending this, by the way, are endorsing Donald Trump's point of view because he is happy with this, and he is thanking Russia and China. So, okay, he said just moments ago, acknowledging and endorsing the Board of Peace, which will be chaired by me and include the most powerful and respected leaders throughout the world. This will go
like
down
Tony
as one
Blair.
of the biggest, like Tony Blair, like the ultra-Zionists. One of the biggest approvals in history of the United Nations, will lead to further peace all over the world. and is a moment of true historic proportions. Thank you to the United Nations and all of the countries on the UN Security Council: China, Russia, France, United Kingdom, Algeria, Denmark, Greece, Guyana, South Korea, Pakistan, Panama, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, and Somalia. Also, thank you to the countries that weren't on this committee but strongly backed the effort, including Qatar, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Turkey, and Jordan. The members of the board and many more exciting announcements will be made in the coming weeks. So Donald Trump is thanking China, Russia, is thanking literally the countries that you are defending, and is also thanking, by the way, the Saudis, Qatar, all of the Arab states that were supposed to save Palestine, that were supposed to advocate on the behalf of Palestinians, that haven't been advocating on their behalf for years and years. So why would they start now? Why would you even use that as an argument? It's not a legitimate entity. And then China's argument came out where they said, well, we wanted to make sure we represented basically, the world we see it, a sovereignty. They didn't want to interfere. They didn't. This is what China always says. This is what they do.
Does interfere.
But they do interfere. Yes, so they do interfere when it's convenient. They do interfere. Go ahead.
Yeah, they do. No, they do interfere, because it's not only Sudan, it's Yemen. I mean, we've talked about this before, the supplying of drones to Saudi Arabia from 2015 onwards, the looting of oil using their relations with the illegitimate Saudi puppet regime that's based in Aden. They do interfere, and we keep saying this. They didn't economically quarantine Israel for not only violating international law on every single feasible level, right? I mean, really, this isn't just violating international law. That's not strong enough. This is violating every code of humanity that has existed in history, even before the UN was created, and all of its flawed, whatever it is. Of course, the UN doesn't embody the morality and the integrity and the humanity that it should represent. But that doesn't mean that we should abandon it. That doesn't mean that we should stop looking and holding countries to account if they are not using their power to defend humanity. And effectively, Russia and China did not use their power to defend humanity. And I remind people that they did the same thing in 2011 when they abstained on the no-fly zone in Libya. And Putin was interviewed talking about Libya not being a democracy. Well, hello, Russia and China, all of them are now operating back inside Libya, trying to secure their interests. So this is what I'm trying to say. And when you look at how they've both at certain times abstained or approved resolutions that have brought about the blockade of 30 million Yemeni people, led to their complete breakdown of their medical services, their humanitarian services, starvation, disease, they've approved those resolutions. So, just let's not, one, I don't want to keep this in the confines of what little international law remains as being useful, because we know this, the ICC, the ICJ, all of them are failing to do anything about Israel. It's all a load of rhetoric. But I also want to draw people's attention to the context. Now, everyone is also talking about the fact that Trump was putting pressure on everybody to vote the resolution in. Now, everyone is saying, oh, but, Russia and China are playing this kind of super 5 million D chess. And they're going to allow the United States to destroy itself by abstaining. No, hello, this doesn't work. Like, if you want the US to destroy itself, you veto it and you prevent what they're actually now going to achieve in the occupied territories, because we shouldn't forget what's going on in West Bank and the fact that the Israelis are intent on exterminating and eradicating all armed resistance in the region, not only in Palestine. But when you look at the fact that, okay, let's look at Saudi Arabia. So they're basically being courted. I mean, that people are not kind of curling up in horror when basically Trump in front of Mohammed bin Salman tells him effectively it's okay that you murdered Khashoggi. That's fine. You're a phenomenal human being, so it's fine, because they're about to give the US $1 trillion. They're upping from 600 billion to 1 trillion, just as the House and Senate vote through on releasing the Epstein files. At which point, of course, the Zionists are going to scream, oh my God, okay, we're going to defund the US because we don't want what's in the Epstein files to come out. So cue Saudi Arabia coming in. But now we hear that the F-35s that Trump is offering to Saudi Arabia are going to be a lower spec than the ones offered to or given to Israel. So in other words, they will still protect Israel over and above any of the kind of henchmen in the region, which include Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But of course, what they did say was, yeah, okay, but now Saudi Arabia is a non-NATO ally, our most important non-NATO ally. So they've basically given Saudi Arabia the defense guarantees that they were looking for, pushing Saudi Arabia towards normalization, right? But then, more interestingly, let's look at what happened with Jolani after his visit to the White House, his meeting with Trump, the instructions he was given. First of all, he went, or I think it was Shaibani, went straight to the foreign minister of the Takfiri junta in Damascus, went straight to the UK, but then he went to China. Now, up until this point, China has been refusing to recognize the Takfiri regime that was put in power in December 2024 on the basis that, I can't remember the number, of the Uyghur terrorists that are operating under the auspices of HTS inside Syria. And of course, 500,000 Syrian Arab army soldiers died fighting those Uyghur and other nationality terrorists, including Russian-speaking, since 2011, which kept China quite content because the Uyghurs weren't going to come back to China and they could rely on the Syrian army to sacrifice itself to get rid of the Uyghur extremists inside Syria itself. But now, of course, it's a different problem because the Uyghurs have been empowered by Jolani. So what happens? So this White House, UK, China, Shaibani goes to China, and guess what? Suddenly, China recognizes the HTS regime in Damascus that's committing genocide against Syrian ethnic minorities. It's still continuing. It hasn't stopped. So it recognizes the government. It gets a foothold back in Syria through reconstruction. And it gets commitments, according to various reports, both in Chinese media and I think in AP. It gets commitments from Jolani that he'll send back the Uyghur terrorists to China in batches. I think the first batch is supposed to be around 400. So that's that. Then let's have a look at Russia. So on the 15th of November, Putin calls Netanyahu, right? Bearing in mind that in February 2025, it was Israel that was lobbying Trump to allow Russia to keep its bases in Syria, partly because that helps Israel to contain Turkish expansionism and to contain it in the north, not allowing it to come into central Syria or to expand even towards the northeast border with Iraq, because Israel supports the Kurds that will eventually be given an autonomous region in the northeast to secure the oil interests and to provide Israel with its David's corridor up the eastern flank of Syria. So the phone call between Putin and Netanyahu, and according to very sort of scant reports in Russian and Israeli media, they discussed the Middle East, including Gaza, Iran, and Syria. On the 17th, Russia sends a military delegation to Damascus that then goes on a military tour around the southern region of Syria, which is under the control or under the occupation, or large swathes of it are under occupation of the Zionist forces. That is then followed by the resolution and Russia's abstention. One day after the resolution passes, thanks largely to Russia and China's abstention, Netanyahu appears in the south, having there is an agreement with Damascus that Russia will, in theory, police the south in order to prevent Zionist expansion, which is nonsense. And then on the 19th, Netanyahu enters the south triumphantly to visit the troops there, talking about the fact that, of course, they're not going to leave. They need a buffer zone. So if you lay this out logically, this is my point, right? If you look at the contextual maneuvering, of course, deals are being done. Of course, then there was the report in Politico that a secret deal had been done also on Ukraine. That's been kind of called out as fake news by a number of commentators. But I'm not entirely sure. I think, in a sense, that could be a degree of conditioning to there being some kind of peace deal that Trump is going to force through, because Zelensky really hasn't got a leg to stand on, unless, of course, Trump wants to effectively go head to head with the EU and the UK, which is another possibility. And it's something that Kirill Dmitriev is also pushing towards in his rhetoric and in his statements on X. So coming back to the abstention issue, if we look at what was happening around that abstention and the fact that we know the US and Trump were putting pressure on aligned states, but that includes even countries like Algeria, by the way, that traditionally should be pro-Palestine and would not normally, in my opinion, have voted in favor of this kind of resolution, which, kicks Palestinian statehood down the road, basically.
So I want to touch back on the Russia saving Syria part, because there was this account that, and not just one, there were several, pro-Russia accounts, right? And they were saying that Russia is just coming back to Syria to protect it from Israel, and that they came to a conclusion, they came to an agreement together, because of this, that they wanted the peacekeeping troops at the Syrian-Israeli border. And when I pointed out something that we discussed, Vanessa, we discussed a long time ago, that the Israelis advocated before U.S. Congress for Russia to keep its military bases in Syria, a lot of these people were like, what? I didn't know that happened. That happened in February of 2025 of this year. Okay. And a lot of people missed that and didn't even realize
it wasn't widely reported. It wasn't widely reported, actually. It was kind of kept very low key.
Yeah. Well, but we found out about it, right? And we talked about it, and we said it as one of the things that we found interesting. And you've done, I think, several articles on these Russia's bases in the region, and also the corridors and all of this, because it's all related to that. If you're looking at actual geopolitics, you're looking at what's happening on the ground and not just what people are saying, because what they're saying is one thing and what they're doing is another. And so this is yet another example of the altruism that they are imposing on Russia and China, because the reality is that Russia returned to Syria because it wanted to keep its bases and expand its economic interests. And this is very easy to know about Russia, because they've never really hidden that. They've been pretty, I will say, upfront about their relationship with Israel, about their relationship with Syria, and how quickly they normalized with Jolani. They've been upfront about, wanting a international relationship with pretty much everybody in the world. And they've been very, very hard on following the UN Charter. That's the thing. They've been very much, we're going to follow the UN Charter. We're going to follow the UN Charter. We're not going to push away from that. Even when they talk about a multipolar world order and BRICS, they talk about basically mimicking the UN Charter. And so what does that tell you is that they're not going to deviate from an already failed mechanism like the UN. They're not going to do something altruistic like create some sort of resistance or anti-imperialist, anti-hegemonic force against the United States, because you have Kirill Dmitriev, who has been engaged with the Trump administration this time and before, and has his tentacles everywhere in the corporate sector and the political sector in the United States, and has been in on these conversations, saying that there will be some sort of peace deal, that they're working on some sort of plan. So I also choose to, from what I've seen, I think, yes, maybe they don't have the confirmations about some sort of deal, but I believe that we will see Trump negotiate something in Russia, Ukraine, because it's going to add to the image that he's trying to portray as being the peace president. He's now got the board of peace in Gaza. He negotiated the ceasefire first. He's trying to, be the peace guy. We know very well that's a farce, but the reality is that's what they're leading with. And when you have the backing of Russia, when you have a very, very close relationship in terms of standing together, and as Vanessa mentioned, against the UK and the EU, as if they are now the ones that America, the United States, and Moscow are looking at as the problem. I think what we're going to see is that possibility of some sort of deal. But that deal, just like Russia's presence in Syria, had to be negotiated with the Zionist entity and with the United States. There is no way that Russia would be allowed in Syria if the United States and Israel didn't allow it, that they wouldn't be opposed in one way or another. If we are to believe that Russia is this anti-hegemonic, anti-imperialist power, then what wouldn't they be opposed by these forces? And instead, what Russia is doing is negotiating ways to continue expanding its interests. So the people that are out there trying to impose, who has associations with Goldman Sachs, with Eric Prince, with literally some of the worst
Davos,
corporations that you could possibly imagine, is Putin's guy, is Putin's go-to guy for advising in economics and policy. Well, what do you expect? I mean, I'm sorry, we're destroying this fantasy that many people have created about multipolarity, but we have been saying this for months now, that multipolarity does not mean equity, that these relationships that Russia has been investing in Syria, in Jolani, Syria, which, as Vanessa has mentioned before, I think we've talked about this, Jolani has been like this messenger pigeon going between China, between Russia, between Israel, the United States. He's like a key figure that's just been pushed around there. In fact, much more useful than Zelensky himself, because he's the one that's like getting sent out there. This is a head chopper. This is an Al-Qaeda terrorist. And nobody, and all these people defending Russia and China just don't talk about that. Go look at all the commentators and the people that are focused on how great China and Russia are. Are they even talking about this? They're not even allowed to talk about it, maybe. I don't know. But like, it's, for me, it's like, then at that point, how do you continue to trust these people when they're essentially captured and compromised? And it's enraging, because it's so easy to sell out Palestinians. It's so easy to sell out the Middle East or West Asia, because, hey, they're just these Arabs that always end up on war and killing themselves. And it's been like that for millennia, and there's nothing we can do about it. Russia doesn't owe Palestine anything. China doesn't owe them anything. Actually, they do, when they're engaging in trade with Israel, and they're enabling the Israeli genocidal empire that is essentially so powerful that even the nations that are supposed to stand against it will not do it because of their own self-interest. And that's fine if we were to outright say these things, if we were to be honest and say, hey, by the way, Russia and China, they're not engaging in any anti-imperialist policies. They're just going to expand their interests economically and going to trade and have relations with whoever they want. And if it benefits some of their allies, great. If it doesn't, that's also fine too. But people aren't being honest about that. And that's the problem that I have with a lot of these people's reactions and trying to justify this as something that is even justifiable when it's not. We've gone beyond now. I didn't know how they were going to justify this, but we've gone beyond the point of no return here. And I think that, the one thing, Vanessa, that I was happy to see online, since we're on the subject of these sort of narratives that are being thrown at us, is how the majority of users on Twitter who follow us or who follow politics that are not big accounts, that are like regular people that simply follow, have been going at a lot of the journalists and commentators or podcasters, whatever the hell they are, and have been saying, no, I don't, who have been trying to justify this vote, have been saying, no, I don't agree with you. I think this was wrong. This is bad. This is not acceptable. And you know why that is? Because they don't have an economic incentive. They don't have a PR incentive. They're not afraid to lose the support of the industry behind Russia, China, behind BRICS, behind multipolarity. They're not afraid of that. So they have no problem saying it. But it is the big accounts, the people that are supposed to know better, that are trying to justify this. And that tells me that the majority of people have seen the reality. It's just that they're still hearing the voices of a lot of these big accounts and influencers who are right there right now trying to say that they did the right thing by not vetoing and tying their hands and saying, oh, well, it's, not our problem. Well, it is. It's everybody's problem.
It is everybody's problem. And this is another thing that really annoyed me, is that somehow this is converted into an Arab problem. So the Arabs should sort it out, as if a genocide that is going on our watch as human beings globally, we should be opposed to it, and we should be doing everything in our very limited power to prevent it and to hold those accountable who are both facilitating it and ignoring it, or doing nothing when they have the power to do something, doing nothing about it. And that, I would definitely put Russia and China into that category. I would go further and say they're actively supporting it because of the various reasons that we've talked about. Of course, not to the same extent as the US and the UK and the EU, blah, blah, blah. And in fact, I do want to pick up one comment that was put out by a relatively high profile influencer, where he basically said everyone's attacking Russia and China because it's easier than attacking the US. Like, what planet are you on? What planet are you on when you come out with nonsense like this? Nobody is saying that China and Russia are responsible for the situation that now exists in Palestine. Nevertheless, they have a responsibility as two of the most powerful countries in the world today to ensure that genocides don't happen. And they have failed to do that. And that should be held up. They should be held accountable in whatever way we can, whether it's through media, whether it's through YouTube channels, whatever. They should be held account to this. And people should be engaging with this, because that's the only way things change. But when you've got an entire army that is basically, circling the wagons around Russia and China, which effectively means they're not circling the wagons around the absolutely off the scale industrial criminal slaughter that is going on in Palestine and in the region. They're not doing that. That it's literally getting othered. It's getting put into, the Arab room, so we don't have to look at it. We don't have to open the door on it. It can stay there, and we can just keep our wagons around Russia and China, and that's fine. And we'll defend them, even if they, whatever they do, we'll defend them. And this doesn't work anymore. That's the point. People have been so pulled through, a ringer emotionally, psychologically by what they've seen happening for the last 2 years. None of this makes any sense to them anymore. The simple thing is, they should have vetoed this. They should, on principle, have said, we don't agree with it. There's no 5D chess going on. Yes, there is potential that there's geopolitical interest. We've just talked about that. But why should the UN Security Council is not a place that should be defending the geopolitical interests of any entity. It should be defending the sovereignty and the self-determination of peoples everywhere in the world. However poor or dispossessed or disenfranchised those people are, their self-determination is what the members of the UN Security Council should be defending. And that's what Russia and China failed to do. It's just, I can't, it's beyond belief that people are defending this for me. Sorry. I get when you look at what they're being subjected to, Palestinians, it's just unbelievable.
I just think it goes to show you that the majority of people who support, who say they support Palestinian rights, do so because it's become a slogan for them to stand by.
They support victimhood.
Yeah,
they support them as victims.
Slogans. It's essentially liberalism, is what it is. I mean, at the end of the day, it's only a brand. It's become a brand. It's become actually profitable for a lot of people, right? To be the anti-Zionist voices. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, and them defending what they believe is the, whether it's like the socialist position or the anti-imperialist position or whatever, they're not looking at reality. They're looking at their ideological ideal situation of these countries that doesn't exist. And we've talked about this. I mean, obviously Russia isn't the USSR, but a lot of people still look at it as such. And people right now are still convincing themselves that China is not engaged in capitalism when it is very clear that it is and has been for a very, very long time. And it, in fact, it's so so good at it, actually, which is the ironic part. They're so good at it, at engaging in this capitalist world. I mean, they're doing things that we would call out in the United States. If you're going to be this anti-imperialist, you're going to call out the United States for doing this. If the United States, if the UK had been the ones that would behave like this and we didn't know about it, we would call them out. But obviously we don't expect them not to. We expect them to stand by Israel. It is because people have placed so much hope on China and Russia that we should be demanding. And people will sit there and tell us, exactly like that comment said, that we don't want to criticize the United States, the UK, and Europe. Literally, we spend all our time doing that. That is the number one thing we do. The problem is these people have taken the I guess the fear of not wanting to stand by any sort of NATO language, not wanting to promote any sort of regime change type of rhetoric, and in an effort to ensure that we respect what other countries are doing as sovereign people. I understand that process. That doesn't mean that these countries are perfect. It doesn't mean they're above criticism. Nobody is. Nobody is. And if there's a reality happening on the ground where they're doing something wrong, it is our duty, especially if you're a journalist, if you're somebody that has a platform that people look to for analysis, it is your duty to say that, to say this was not a good decision. And it's very clear that it was not a good decision, because even if it's symbolic, even if you want to say, well, Israel would have attacked anyway, Israel will attack anyway. So why not just veto it? It's not
going to make any difference.
It's like they keep repeating the same line.
Yeah. No, and it's another point that I want to make, because this does come up. And I know that you've made the point and I've made the point. Russia being back in Syria does have a degree of benefit for the people where Russia will potentially consolidate influence to a degree. I lived in Syria. I worked in Syria when the Russians were working alongside the Syrian Arab Army. I can say up until 2018, there was a huge degree of respect, both for the Syrian Arab Army and for the people of Syria. That changed after 2018. Whether that was a change in policy back in Moscow, but from 2018 through to 2025, it gradually deteriorated. And to the degree where personal experience, like I would often have permissions from Syrian intelligence. You had to, as a journalist, you had to get permission from intelligence, from military, and from the Ministry of Information to go in the field to report on any particular situation. There were times when I had all of those permissions, all of their papers, and I would arrive and there would be, say, a Russian commander in the base with the Syrians. And the Russian commander would tell me, no, you can't come here and report. But I'm in Syria. I have all the permissions from XYZ. But he would have the final say, right? So when I say things will be better, they will be better from the perspective that, in theory, the Takfiris will not be operating in the areas where Russia has influence. Yes, that is a positive. Is Russia doing this for the good of the Syrian people? No, of course not. Let's take that out of the equation, please. Right. There is nuance in this discussion, sure. And my fear is what happens, and this happens every time there is a divisive issue, whether it's COVID, whether it's Syria, whether it's Ukraine. You have people that, as I said, kind of circle the wagons around their bias and fight to maintain and to confirm their own bias. And what that does is it reduces debate down to fighting over or to contending with a bias, rather than breaking it down into any kind of complexity or nuanced discussion and debate where people can actually really understand what's going on, right? None of these people are going to go and talk to Craig Mokhiba or Asal Rad, or even Francesca Albanese, and get their comment on what is going on. None of them are speaking about or to the resistance factions in the region. No one here is making a fuss about this, by the way, because they didn't expect Russia or China to do anything else. They didn't expect what the resolution to change anything on the ground other than to put it within the frame of international law, UN security resolution approval. But they're not expecting anything to change. That's the difference. So we end up arguing about nothing. And another point that I wanted to come on to, because I've noticed many people actually saying, okay, well, what if they vetoed it? What difference would it have made? Well, they're also just defeating the argument they made about the whole abstention thing anyway. But I want to just think about this, because it's an important question. Ultimately, what it would do, in my opinion, and I'd like to get your opinion, is that it would restore the faith in there being some international law, humanitarian charter, convention structure behind what Russia and China are doing. Ultimately, this was not only a betrayal of the Palestinian people, but I think it was a betrayal of, as we've talked about, the expectations of people that there must be someone in this world today that is going to live up to the principles that we as human beings want to live under. And they didn't. They didn't. So for me, that is a betrayal of every single aspect of what being human is and what kind of world we want to live in. Imagine if they had vetoed it, the respect that people would have for them. Trump wouldn't be able to thank them on the podium.
Exactly.
Of course, it's not going to stop anything. It's not going to stop Trump continuing with his plan. That's the resistance's job, right? That's not Russia or China's job. People are quite right on this. But then don't put Russia and China up on some kind of moral pedestal, because that doesn't work anymore. And they've just destroyed their own image and reputation. And potentially they've destroyed that image and reputation even among their allies. Of course, people are not economically going to turn away from Russia and China. They need them because the majority of these countries are under threat of sanctions from the US and so on. But Russia and China are also benefiting from that paradigm because they're buying resources at lower prices, et cetera, right? So I'd be really interested to know what your opinion is on what if they had vetoed, would it have made a difference?
You know, what if you had fought back and not just let yourself die? Would that have made a difference? I mean, if you were going to die anyway, I mean, that's essentially what the thought process there. It's like, well, what's the point then if you're not going to push back against hegemony? If they fill their rhetoric up about being against Western hegemony, if Russia is taking on the entirety of NATO and the entirety of Western hegemony, then why aren't they able to do something as symbolic, as unimportant as a veto? Why? Oh, because they're going to be criticized? Well, they're criticized anyway. They're sanctioned anyway. Why are they groveling at the feet of the West that has always gotten them in these positions? I mean, this is what I'm seeing here. I'm seeing, and I meant to send you an article of an interview I saw about this, but, you know, Putin as a leader has always coveted the West. He has always wanted to be a part of it. He's always been like a liberal in the general sense of the world, like in terms of wanting to have a close relationship with the West. And that only changed when they were, you know, pushed to the brim. And when it was pragmatically the best decision they had to make was defend their territory. That's why they didn't go in there to save necessarily the people of Donbass as number one, because if that would have been number one, they would have gone in years ago in 2015, 2014. They waited 10 years. Well, they waited 9 years to go in, essentially. And so when people say, well, what difference would this have made? It would have shown the world that there is an opposition in China and Russia against Israel. They've already vetoed other resolutions before. Why now are they not doing that?
Well, that's another point. Sorry, that's another point, is the US uses its veto all the time to prevent peace in Gaza. And here they had the one opportunity where they could have put an obstacle in the way of the finalization of the final solution, and they didn't use it.
And they didn't use it when it's like, important. And if it's not important, then why didn't they do it? I mean, you can't get your way, get out of this, because either it's important or it's not important. And either way, they should have vetoed if they're standing against, if they're supposed allies. And then they're standing against this takeover by the West, which includes Israel, includes the people that have been the Gulf states. But they didn't do it, not because they felt like, it would have morally they stand there, but they just didn't do it because it just wouldn't have been effective. I actually believe they didn't do it because they have made deals to not stand in the way and not do it. Not just Russia and China's economic deals with Israel, which you've talked about several times now, the Chinese companies with Israel, but I think there are other deals that we don't know about. And I think for Russia, it's going to be the Russia-Ukraine issue that we're going to see. It's going to be the minerals in the Donbass and also in Russia. There's economic deals that we that have been talked about for months since February.
Africa is coming back into the picture also.
Africa, and this is why the U.S. has refocused on Africa, and also look at Latin America. Look at the vulnerability of Latin America. Look what happens when there's nobody coming to the defense. Now, what do you expect? Russia and China to save the world? Nobody expects Russia and China to save the world. We expect them to, at the very least, be in opposition to something that is clearly goes against whatever they say they stand against. Go live up to your words. And that's the minimum.
That's another point. Is we're not asking, as I just said, the resistance here is not asking Russia and China to send arms or forces or anything, like this. No one's asking that. As you've just said, we're just asking them to uphold the principles of international law and humanitarian charters, right? As the Venezuela ambassador here said to me when I was asking him about Russia supplying all these weapons that were being told on social media that are flooding into Venezuela, and he just laughed. He said, well, no, like the majority of them, and that's not what we're receiving. But anyway, he said, Vanessa, if we're receiving weapons, we're paying for them. They're not coming in as some kind of, wrapped in a ribbon and like, here, you're ever such a good ally. We're going to send you weapons. This is a market. Of their heart. Yeah, this is a market. Why is China supplying both sides in the conflict in the Sudan? It makes money.
Is that a communist Marxist belief to supply? I mean, accordingly, it's not. But if China's doing it, then I guess we have to justify it somehow that it is, right? Isn't that capitalism? To focus on growing your capital, like at the sacrifice of people, of poor people in these countries, in the the global majority. Isn't that then you're sacrificing them, you're throwing them under the bus? But it's okay as long as we get our interests. Okay, that's fine. But then don't put the onus of them being moral, virtuous leaders in the world, because then they're not. And they're not offering anything different than what we have now, except that they're, instead of being one power, now there's going to be four powers that equally operate regardless of moral ethics and regardless of the concern for people who were born into slavery, essentially, and who we have so easily just dismiss and discard when it's convenient. I mean, so they're no different.
And I mean, when we talk about the Zionist expansionism economically, because Greater Israel, as we've discussed, is not only about territorial grab, it's about resource grab, but it's also about expanding their economy. Look at the investments of BlackRock. Zionist-owned, Larry Fink-owned BlackRock in China. Someone pointed this out to me today. Russia already is kind of a done deal as far as I'm concerned. They're heavily influenced by Shabbat Lubavitch, 1.x number of Russian dual nationality passport holders in Israel, some of which, of course, have been fighting in the IOF and actually committing the genocide and so on. But in China, no one's actually looking at the Zionist influence through commerce, through capitalism, global capitalism, in China. And that's something that all of these kind of China acolytes are not going to look at, because that destroys the dream, right? But if it's a reality, it's there and it should be investigated, just as we investigate the connections between the oligarchs and the transnational ruling elite in the West. It should also be investigated and looked at. Again, come back to Kirill Dmitriev. Look at his background. This is the guy who has one foot in both camps, right? Supporting Putin's policies, but comes from Stanford, Harvard, as you said, McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, Davos, WEF, pushes the Russian version of the COVID vaccine. This is a guy who will happily pull Russia towards the West, and certainly towards Trump and the United States. He's pushing the Bering Straits tunnel. He's sort of, raising Trump's status to a monarchist background, which is very interesting. People should actually follow his account, because it's very revealing when one considers how close he is to Putin, and how he's currently kind of the number one envoy dealing with the United States, not necessarily He's dealing with certain members of the European community, but he's definitely not, to my knowledge, dealing with the UK, unless I've missed something.
I just want to comment on that, Vanessa, because I think it's important people understand his role is to actually bring a closeness between the United States and Russia. And it's going to be painted, and it already is being painted by many in the neocon US right and the far right in Russia as a good thing that is going to connect Christian nations. And this is why he's pushing a lot of the anti-immigration, supremacist type of rhetoric when it comes to Europe, when it comes to Muslims, when it comes to all these things. And that's not saying that, everybody in Russia is racist or that government is necessarily racist as a whole. It's not monolithic. But what we're saying is there is a drive in these narratives to connect on these levels with the Trump administration. And that is what worries me. And in fact, one of the reasons why I have been so critical of what this guy is preaching, it's because he's preaching. I mean, it's almost like the left is completely like, or the anti-imperialists or whatever they call themselves now, because it loses meaning, are completely deprived of what it means to be anti-empire. You have this sort of czarist agenda, as Vanessa mentioned, a desire to bring back a monarchy, an existence of Russia as an actual type of dictatorial entity. Whereas right now, it's not necessarily at that point at all, but it is kind of like a push to go that way, to go to a more state like that. And going forward, I will be mentioning more things about what's happening domestically. There's a lot of advances in digital tech coming, in terms of digital IDs, in terms of all of this stuff that is going to be unraveling in Russia as well. It's not, going away. There's more control of the internet. There's all of these things that are happening that are kind of showing that this is a direction where, say, the next person that takes over from Putin could likely go. And the problem with that is that worries me, because the last time that Russia allowed the US to infiltrate in its own government, or under the Soviet Union, under its own government affairs, is when the Soviet Union collapsed and everything went to hell. And it really hurt the majority of the population. I mean, it was a very dark time. And whenever they do this, they end up on the losing side. So as somebody, people might say, why does she hate, Fiorella hates Russia? No, I don't understand. Why is she like saying this stuff? I'm not even saying anything, that's not being said by them themselves. This is what they're saying. This is what they're saying. It's just, we're talking about it while the rest of people are ignoring it. Like, they're ignoring the giant elephant in the room. They're ignoring all the stuff with China and Russia both, because we've said before, there might be a financial incentive, there might be a fear of losing allyship, whatever the case may be, they're ignoring it. And we're only talking about it, but it's out there. It's being put out there. It's not being hidden. And I worry about Russia's future, because as somebody that lives there and as somebody that has ties there, I don't want it to see going down the path of destruction. And the West will be the destruction of Russia if Russia lets it. And I'm not going to sit there and say I'm going to stop that, or that I advocate that's an outside force stop that. That is going to be up to Russia. Like, that is respecting sovereignty. Say, this is I don't think this is beneficial, but hey, if that's the direction they're going, that's the direction they're going. We're merely talking about it. We're merely pointing it out in the context of the global world map and how things are going, right? The grand chessboard of sorts. We're telling you what is happening. We're not saying that the motivations are only nefarious, but what you can't deny the money ties. You can't deny the transactions that are happening as this vote was made. You can't deny that the conversations about potential ending of the war in Ukraine. You can't deny that China has already made alliances with the new Syrian regime over the Uyghurs. You can't deny the fact that China has a relationship with the United States as well, even though they're at odds in terms of the global economic market. But so then this kind of just puts us back, Vanessa, at, you know, we don't want to get to the point where we're just being reductionist and saying everybody's in on it, nothing matters, there's nothing to do, because there are people that say that and say everything is theater, there's no, you know, nobody's against anybody, it's all one giant conspiracy. And like, I'm not saying that it is all like that, but what we're saying is the number one thing operating here is capital, it's economics, it's driving these major players. It's not altruism. Unfortunately, I wish it was. I truly do. I wish it was, and I wish people were moving along the lines of doing things for the better of humanity. I wish that Russia and China would supply weapons to Iran and would go and build some sort of coalition to actually fight hegemony, because in my opinion, that's what it's going to take to defeat Zionist Israel and the supremacist global order that is there. That's what it's going to take. Why do they differentiate between Nazis? Tell me, did the Nazis not get a gigantic war against them by the major players? Wasn't that imposing on sovereignty? See, that's because people still view the Nazis as any different than what's out there right now before us, but it's no different. In fact, this is worse, because we still aren't able to view it as what is, and it's going to require people to actually come together. But the whole, oh, we respect sovereignty so we don't interfere, it's a cop-out, because again, not only do they do interfere, but they also would oppose. And opposing something when you're being attacked, when you're being oppressed, when there is an international conglomerate, even in nations like China and Russia, that of Zionists and supremacists that control the financial sectors and the transnational sectors of the entire world, and you're Palestine or you're Palestinians, and you expect them to just simply, you know, fight whenever they try, they're entirely bombed. There must be some sort of human-minded ability to do that, to have a pushback, and that's what the resistance is there for. But then then don't go and say that China and Russia are sending weapons, that they're doing this, that they stand by Palestine, when really it's just all rhetoric. Like, I'm sick of hearing all of that.
Definitely. Yeah. And another interesting thing that sort of came into my mind, there's two things really. Part of the resolution is effectively Trump is bailing out Israel, because instead of post this section of the genocide, Israel providing reparations and reconstruction, no, instead, the IMF and the World Bank are going to come in and spend the billions, of course, to build the free trade zone and Jared Kushner's waterfront, the luxury properties, and avail themselves of Palestinian gas. But this raises another interesting question that I haven't seen anyone bring up either. When we talk about deals being done, because effectively this is the next step in turning Palestine into Israel, effectively eradicating Palestinian statehood and sovereignty and self-determination, deporting the resistance to other countries where we know they're going to get assassinated anyway, because that's what Israel does. And Israel now is clearly intent on murdering Palestinians in diaspora as well as in Palestine. Then you suddenly have the India-Middle East corridor coming into existence. Remember Netanyahu's blessings and curse map. So that's going from Mumbai through the Zionist bloc Gulf states, through Trump's free trade zone in Gaza, into El Arish, into Europe. Now, that could be, when one looks at the configuration of the economic corridors, that could be of some benefit, or at least it's not going to be have a negative impact on Russia and the north-south trade corridor, because that will intersect Mumbai So potentially they can, if Russia and America's relationships improve as they appear to be doing so through Kirill Dmitriev and through whatever under the table deals are ongoing on Ukraine, that's fine. But it doesn't benefit China because it excludes the Belt and Road Initiative. Is that why China is suddenly getting a foothold back in Syria? Do you see what I mean? Like when you actually start looking at the ramifications of what is going on, then it makes you realize either Russia and China are I don't want to use the word stupid, but are naive enough to believe that whatever deal is being done, they're going to benefit from it. And they're not thinking, which I don't really believe, because I don't think they're that unaware on long-term strategy and so on. So that suggests to me, yes, there is a deal going on, right? Because the economic corridors, we know, are the future. They're the new boundaries. They're the new borders. They're the new Sykes-Picot in this region, whatever. That's the reshaping of the world along the economic corridors and who's in control of them, which again is another reason, not only as a launch pad to Africa, but that's also why Russia is establishing itself at certain points in Syria where it can straddle the important economic corridors that are going to be that are either currently or will in the future be passing through Syria to Europe. So just raising that question, because a lot of these analysts are not really thinking about it. They're too busy saying, well, this isn't Russia and China's problem. Well, potentially it is, just as you've pointed out, from Russia's perspective. If it's going to go back into a scenario where it trusts the United States to be a reliable ally from a geopolitical perspective, from a global capitalist perspective, whatever way they want to look at it, they're crazy.
But they are naive enough to do that. And that's the unfortunate part, is that they are actually, they don't view it as something negative. The whole thing that BRICS is about has never been to oppose the United States and the West. That's not how they framed it. They framed it as a multilateral, multipolar world order that includes everybody respecting the sovereignty. But that's okay. That's kind of like what the UN says. So it's just another block that is more supposed to be an economic block, but that it's excluding the players that are really deemed not economically powerful enough. And
the UAE is a member of BRICS, by the way. The UAE is a member of BRICS, and it's actively committing genocide in Sudan, but no one's
so that wasn't a disqualifier. Yeah, that's not a disqualifier, but Venezuela is not allowed in it. You know what I mean?
No.
So
no, because they are resistance oriented.
Yeah. So it's almost like people are trying so hard to convince themselves that this alternative reality is a thing, but really there's no alternative. The alternative is very much just more players in the room, like we said before, more seats at the table, but you have to pay a lot of money and have a lot of power to have a seat at the table. It's not about equity. It's not about bringing the people of Africa and Latin America into positions where they can gain justice or sovereignty. Right now, more than ever, Latin America is in danger. We haven't had a chance to talk about what happened in Mexico, but there's been a regime change attempt by the same players, the Koch brothers, and Western capital, foreign capital, that are trying to overthrow the president of Mexico because there's a threat to that capital, to that wealth of Mexico being in Mexico. And they simply can't allow that. So therefore, they want to do something to change that. And that's a reality. And the same thing is happening in Venezuela. And the same thing has happened throughout Latin America. And the same thing will be happening, by the way, in Honduras. They've tied Honduras to Maduro. They've said that Maduro is going to help Honduras steal the election. They've already said this. I mean, I'm not even joking.
Oh.
And so what we're seeing here, and this is what I want people to understand, is the United States is building a counter block to China, because forget Russia, because not that they're not powerful enough, but they're part of Eurasia. But in terms of the Americas, the United States is building a counter to the Chinese influence in the region. And they're doing it by trying to capture the wealth of Latin America. And they're also going into Africa for the same reason. And so it's become kind of like what are those birds that feed on the carcass of animals?
Vulture capitalism.
Vultures. It's like vulture capitalism. And it's like they're just rushing in to see what they can get out of all of these people who have been completely just destroyed by sanctions, who are the rich countries, the rich countries. They should have the wealth in their respective states, but they don't, because it's been plundered by just everybody for centuries and centuries. And now, instead of restoring any sort of defense and ability and allowing these people to be able to pick themselves up and continue to demand sovereignty and respect, what China and Russia are going to do is they're going to stand by and just help wherever it benefits their economic interest. And that's how they operate in Africa and Latin America. And that's it. It's not about, their belief in anti-colonial sentiments. It's not about any of this stuff that a lot of people have made it out to be. It's simply because it is the necessary thing to do for them to get to get a piece of the pie, to make sure they have enough capital to compete with the West. And it's disgusting when you realize that this is how the world operates, that this, people are just dispensable and none of this matters. And it's all about wealth acquirement. And eventually it will be all about water wars, because that's where we're headed to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes. When we've destroyed the environment with the rare earth mineral mining and processing. Yeah. Which goes into everything that we really shouldn't have in our lives, because it's going to lead us into the kind of surveillance future, right? So, yeah, I think probably we should end there before we should.
Oh my goodness. It's just, I think, we do need to have some of some people on and have this discussion with them, because I think that'll be necessary. I think one wasn't enough. But I think we've said a lot that needed to be said, I think. And yeah.
No, it's been very cathartic as always, because we've both been dealing with this running commentary on social media all day, and it's really sort of quite dismaying. I mean, if I recommend to anyone, go and listen to what Craig McIver is saying. Have a look at BetBeat Media on Substack. They've written a really good article today about, what this all means. Dimitri Lascaris. There are people that are really, upholding their principles and their integrity on this, and actually putting Palestine first, which is, I'm sorry, but it's what an awful lot of people are failing to do. They're dismissing it, actually. For whatever reasons. So
the facades they want to maintain. That's why they're dismissing it. They want to maintain these facades.
But it's also, as you said, it's an inherent Orientalism. It doesn't matter actually whether they're from the Far East or the West. It's a degree of Orientalism where, let the Arabs sort it out for themselves. Let's leave it there, because I'll just get back into another entire rant.
I think so. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for this, 1.5 hour rant on what people should actually be privy to. You should look at things a little bit deeper, and I hope this helps somehow to gain some understanding from everything. It was a little bit ranty, yes, but I think I don't know how else it could have gone.
I think, to end on a positive note, I think I agree with you, Fee, that I was really encouraged by the amount of pushback against people that were just trying to do the mental gymnastics to justify what Russia and China had just done. So from that perspective, I was really encouraged, and I'm really grateful to all of those people for having the integrity to push back against that, despite the fact that the people that were defending Russia and China may well be some of their favorite commentators, analysts, and so on, but they were still coming out. The huge majority in the comments were pushing back against it intelligently and respectfully, and yet actually they were not getting engaged on the points they were making, which is another aspect of what was going on.
And I hope now you see, people's motivations too for what they are. But I'm also very proud of people pushing back and really seeing it. And I think that's also, another discussion for another time, but it has to do a lot with, the issue of where people are in the world and where they are economically and the issue of power. So I mean, the people are with the people, and that's what makes a lot of sense. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next time on Critical Perspectives. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye.